Okay, let's try and unpack this. Just imagine for a second. You get that official letter,
Yeah.
you're young, maybe just out of school, and bang, you're drafted.
It's this terrifying thought.
Right. Not for some job, but for a war.
Oh.
A war that's already reportedly taken, what, over 100,000 lives?
It sounds almost unreal.
But it's happening.
Mm.
For many young men in Russia right now, this is their reality. And makes you wonder, is this just their problem over there?
Or is it maybe a warning sign for, well, for everyone else?
Exactly. That's kind of the core question we need to keep in mind as we dig into this, isn't it?
It really is. And what's striking right off the bat is just the scale.
The scale of the mobilization.
Yeah. Russia's kicked off its biggest military call-up since World War II. We're talking recent months.
Wow. Since WWII. And that's directly linked, like you said, to those casualty numbers.
It seems unavoidable to connect them. Over 100,000 reported dead in Ukraine. That's a huge number.
And the government's response to people trying to avoid it.
It's been harsh. Much tougher penalties, and they're apparently using high-tech tracking now. More surveillance.
So Russia's had drafts before, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
But this one feels different.
That's what the sources suggest. It's consistently described as, well, the most aggressive one yet. It's got teeth.
And you can feel that on the ground.
Oh, absolutely. You hear stories, reports of young guys just scrambling.
How so?
Deleting social media profiles, trying to go off-grid, heading for remote areas maybe, or just making a run for the border.
Fleeing the country.
Yeah, places like Kazakhstan, Georgia. Reports mention those specifically, trying to get out.
And technology plays a role in this, too.
Definitely. Telegram channels, for instance, they're apparently buzzing with tips, escape routes, ways to evade the draft, like a digital underground railroad almost.
Wow. And it's not just the young men themselves.
No, the fear is wider. You read about parents terrified for their sons, families just gripped by this anxiety.
It's tearing families apart, potentially.
And think about this. Universities are reportedly being told to identify eligible students.
Institutions of learning turned into recruitment centers.
Essentially, handing over names, it paints a really grim picture, doesn't it?
It does. So, okay, why? Why this massive aggressive push now? What's the driver?
Well, the information points to something pretty straightforward, if unsettling.
The war.
Yeah. It's just not going according to plan for the Kremlin. They need more soldiers. Period.
Simple need for manpower?
Pretty much. But what's really striking is the reaction, or lack of one.
What do you mean?
You'd maybe expect, in wartime, a mobilization call to spark some patriotism, right? People rallying.
Uh-huh.
But that's not what seems to be happening. Instead, it's this wave of anxiety, fear, really.
So Russia's fighting Ukraine, but also its own people's morale.
That's a crucial point, I think. It's like a two-front battle now, the external enemy and the internal mood.
And it clashes with their own narrative, doesn't it?
How so? Well, framing the war as defending sovereignty, but then needing to resort to what looks like desperate conscription, it feels hollow.
It certainly raises questions about that narrative.
Yeah.
And the long-term costs for Russia itself.
Yeah.
That's something we need to consider.
Like this brain drain idea that keeps coming up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Think about who's fleeing or hiding. Often young people, tech-savvy, educated.
The exact people you need for a modern economy, for the future.
Precisely. They're either leaving Russia or going underground within it. It's hard to see how losing that talent helps Russia down the line.
Definitely not. Okay, so what about the rest of the world? How are they reacting?
Well, neighbors are obviously watching very closely, on high alert.
Europe.
Yeah, reports of increased vigilance at borders and countries bordering Russia. They're tightening control.
But also preparing for
Potentially large numbers of young Russian men trying to cross, seeking refuge. It's a huge challenge for them, humanitarian, political.
a difficult balancing act. And what about, say, NATO? How do they read this? Intelligence assessments, based on the info we have, seem to see this escalation as a pretty clear sign of strain.
Strain on Russia.
Military strain, economic strain. It suggests the war wasn't the quick victory maybe some expected. Hence this urgent need for more troops.
And other big players. China.
China's position is interesting. Reportedly quite quiet, observing.
Playing it cool.
You could say that. They're in a tricky spot, aren't they? Allied with Russia, but with their own global interests, their own economic calculations. This mobilization complicates things for Beijing, you'd imagine.
So are there any upsides for Russia in doing this, despite all the fear and potential brain drain?
From the Kremlin's viewpoint, maybe a few short-term ones.
Like what?
Well, the most obvious is just bodies. manpower, plugging gaps on the front line, even temporarily.
Yeah, sheer numbers.
Second, it's a demonstration of state power, isn't it? Showing they can still compel citizens to serve,
Hmm.
sends a message internally, maybe externally too.
Right, control.
And third, the language used, calling it a defense mobilization. That helps reinforce the state narrative, the propaganda, framing it as necessary for national protection.
Got it. Short-term fixes, projecting strength, controlling the story.
Basically, yeah, but those gains seem fragile, especially when you weigh them against the downsides.
Which seem much more significant, especially long-term. That brain drain again.
It feels permanent, potentially. Losing educated, often urban, young people, that echoes for generations. It hits innovation, future growth.
And the economy more broadly.
Well, think about it. A workforce that's scared, looking over its shoulder, that's not going to be productive, is it? Not innovative.
Well,
Some sources even mention the tech sector potentially collapsing. That's a huge red flag in today's world.
and could this fear boil over?
That's the other risk mentioned, civil unrest. When people feel cornered, fear can turn into resistance. We're already seeing reports, maybe early signs, of draft resistance movements forming.
Wow. So the instability isn't just economic.
It could become political, social too. And these ripples, they don't stop at Russia's borders, do they?
No, the global impact seems clear. You mentioned oil prices.
Potential spikes there, yeah.
Yeah.
More pressure on supply chains, which are already strained.
And governments reacting
Mhm.
probably means more military spending everywhere,
That seems likely. Increased instability usually leads to higher defense budgets globally, an arms race dynamic almost.
which brings us back to that big question. Is this just regional or bigger?
It's hard to argue it's just regional anymore, isn't it?
How so?
Well, you see global alliances shifting, arms races heating up again, and the nuclear threat. It never really went away, did it?
No.
So this draft, this mobilization, it feels like a symptom of a much larger system under serious stress from this long, grinding conflict.
So wrapping this up, the fear we talked about among young Russians,
Mm-hmm.
it's more than just fear of fighting.
That seems to be the point. It's also a fear of being trapped, stuck in a system they see as failing, a system that's crushing their future, ignoring their voice.
Right. No way out.
And it leads to this really profound question, What does it say about our world when running away from a war becomes an act of resistance?
Fleeing becomes defiance.
Yeah. It forces you to think about freedom, state power, individual choice, all of it.
And the stakes are incredibly high. We could be watching, well, the dismantling of a workforce,
Yeah.
a whole generation's future thrown off course.
The future of a nation potentially being reshaped right before our eyes.
And while this is happening in Russia, related to Ukraine, the underlying questions feel universal, don't they?
Absolutely. How far will a state go to hold on to power? How does the world respond when that happens? These aren't just Russian questions.
They're questions for all of us. A sobering look at conflict and its consequences in the 21st century.